I call the member for Newtown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a matter of protocol and a mark of respect, I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the traditional owners on the land in which this Parliament sits. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. That is how John Kaye began his inaugural speech to the Parliament in the other place, and it is based on that phrasing that I remember hearing him make that acknowledgement that I have delivered over many years since the acknowledgements to country that I make whenever I speak at public events. This is just one of the small ways in which John Kaye has influenced and impacted on my political being. In fact, I have never known politics or the Greens without John Kaye. The night of the 2003 state election at the Greens election night party in our Eve Street warehouse was the first time I remember encountering the incredibly passionate and highly intelligent John. It was the first time I had ever volunteered with the party, handing out how to vote cards, and I must admit that I was so nervous to start with that I didn't even get out of the car because I was worried someone would ask me a policy question that I didn't know how to answer. So it took a little bit of encouragement, but eventually I did stand on that polling booth. It was that night that Sylvia Hale was first elected to the New South Wales Parliament and that Ian Cohen was re-elected. John was the campaign coordinator. Over a decade later, in the weeks leading up to the 2015 state election at the Greens for Newtown campaign office, John Kaye MLC was there multiple times, joining teams of door knockers out on the street, and I remember watching the face of one exhausted volunteer coming back to the office with John, trailing about 50 metres behind John. And John said, "I've done this folder, give me another folder." And the volunteer that was door knocking with John looked completely exhausted and a little bit petrified that he had to go out again with John into the streets of Newtown. He also was working the phones with a level of commitment that I have not seen of any other person, I think. At times we were a little bit worried that he would actually start telling people off if they said they weren't going to be voting for us. But it was wonderful to see John's commitment to us making the seat of Newtown green from the very beginning, and it's something that I will never forget, is his dedication and passion to making that a reality. I will never also forget the overwhelming feeling of finding myself elected to this Parliament for the reason that I sat in my first meeting and realised that I was actually now a parliamentary colleague of John Kaye, and I think that's something that will sit with me forever, but also something that I feel was too short a time frame to have learnt the things that he could have taught me and could have shared with me about how better to do my job in this place. Between our first encounter in 2003 and that time, John was ever present in my political journey. Whether that involved campaigning on the streets or debating internal party matters, it is very hard to accept the reality that he is no longer with us. On Friday, as we put our submissions into the strata regulations, I thought to myself, I'll just give John a quick call and check that, and realised I couldn't. Just last night, as I spoke at a forum on lockouts and the need to amend the liquor laws and the review, I thought I'll just check that with John, and realised I couldn't. Beyond the personal loss, which is no doubt felt hardest by John's partner Lynn, who I acknowledge is here today, his family and friends, we as the left and as those that have been part of a progressive party and continue to be part of movements for social change have lost an elder. We have lost so much knowledge, we have lost so much history, we have lost so much experience and so much dedication that I'm not quite sure how we will ever fill that gap. Jamie Parker recounted the days on the day that we heard of the news of John's passing in this place, the breakfast that I had with John Kaye, but I feel I need to tell it again for the record. And that's a breakfast that I had with John Kaye when I was pre-selected as the candidate for the state seat of Newtown. We were in Surrey Hills, and John could obviously tell that I was feeling a little bit daunted by what lay ahead. He gave me some pretty solid advice, albeit a little intense advice, on the assessment of the situation of being a candidate in a potentially winnable seat. He said, it's like running at a solid brick wall, as fast, fearlessly, and with as much determination and energy as you can, while convincing as many people as possible to join you to do so too. Knowing that there are two possible outcomes. One, that you will gather enough momentum and enough support that you will knock the wall down, and on election day you will have succeeded and won. Or alternatively, that you won't. And you will all, with those people, have hit the wall really hard. You'll be very sore, and then your job is to stand there and help pick everyone up again so that they're ready to take on another campaign or another struggle. But the only way, he said, that you will ever gain enough momentum and succeed in knocking that wall over is if you give it everything you've got and convince everyone else to join you and give it everything that they've got. That's the only way you will ever have a chance of succeeding. It wasn't perhaps the most reassuring analogy of smashing myself into a brick wall, but I totally get what John meant and what he was telling me, because he knew from experience that holding back and not giving it all was never going to work, that we would have never achieved the goals that we set out to achieve if we didn't give it our all. And he gave it everything, and it is something that I still consider to be the most valuable advice that I received from him during that campaign. There's a picture of John and I from 2004 standing at a refugee action just down the road on Macquarie Street, holding a Free the Refugees sign. The amount of actions, rallies, Greens meetings and community events I attended with John over many years is something that I will always remember. The fact that he was always there, you would always run into him, and he would always be talking to about 400 people at the same time that all knew him as well and would come up and speak to him. And I'll never forget at the end of last year how happy John looked at our end of year drinks when I announced that my partner Christian and I were having a baby. I'm sad that he will never get to see that. To Lynn, to John's family, to his team and those... Sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned that, now I'm going to lose it. To Lynn, to John's family, to his team, and to those who are feeling the enormous loss of the incredible man, our love, strength, solidarity and support to you. It's hard to believe that we are here standing in this place doing this, and I think John would probably expect us to bring it back to the issues that he cared about, or he'd be a little bit disappointed if we stood up and spoke without talking about them. And what better way to do that than to highlight the issues that he raised in his inaugural speech. On climate change and renewable energy, John said, and it is still as relevant today as it was then, this state faces two distinct choices. We can either work together and prepare for a future that takes us beyond fossil fuels, or we can put our heads in the sand and hope that something will turn up. If we ignore the warnings, we are risking economic and environmental devastation. John, I give you our commitment that we will continue to work for a transition to 100% renewables in New South Wales and ensure that we will continue to call out the hypocrisy of those that continue to be in bed with the polluting fossil fuel industry. On equality and discrimination, John said, we must reverse the trends towards greater social, ethnic and economic divisions, not only in Australia but globally. We have to undo the growth in inequality of economic outcomes. He continued that we have to surrender the luxury of allowing prejudice, greed and ignorance to infect debates and decision-making, not just within this parliament but throughout society. John, we will continue to call out the systemic issues that further entrench inequality and prejudices that perpetuate discrimination. And on public education, he said, our great public school system and TAFE colleges knock some of the rough edges off socio-economic disadvantage and create a celebration of diversity. More importantly, they are central to a culturally, economically and politically successful society that can innovate and thrive in a greenhouse century. John, I can promise you that we will continue to campaign for public education, to highlight the damage successive governments have done to our TAFE system and to speak out against the privatisation of our education system and the direction of public funds to private schools. There are so many other issues that John campaigned on, especially continuing to highlight the corrupting influences of donations and powerful lobby groups on our community and our society. To the young people who have said that John inspired them to get involved in political change, to the activists, the unionists, the education campaigners, the political allies and friends of John's who feel like they have lost their connection to this place, can I say today and put on the public record that my door and the door of all of the Greens parliamentary colleagues are open to you. Please do not feel like with the loss of John you have lost your connection to this place, because that would be a bad way for us to continue his legacy. Instead, if you are a friend of John's, if you're a campaigner with John, please know that you can always get in touch with us and always know that his campaigns, the campaigns that he fought for, are campaigns that we will continue. Jamie, the member for Balmain, has talked about the commemoration and celebration of John's life that happened on Friday. It was a pretty remarkable event that I think shows the impact that John had on so many people. And just then, as we were debating in the chamber whether we would move an amendment to an amendment on the WestConnex motion, knowing that this condolence motion was coming up, we had a bit of a discussion about the timing and figured that John would be very disappointed if we missed the opportunity to raise a political issue just because we were talking about his condolence motion. So to those in the gallery that had to wait, I feel that we did consider his interests, and we figured that John would be very annoyed if we put that aside to then do the condolence motion. John was there for so many of us. There's so many more of us now in this parliament than were here when he first got elected. The movement is growing, but we will still suffer a great loss. I am not sure how we will do it without him, but I can commit that we will do everything we can to continue the work that he has, with the determination, drive, passion, intellect and commitment that he always demonstrated. John achieved so much, he taught us so much, he gave so much. There was so much more that we could have had the opportunity to learn. To say that John will be greatly missed is the biggest understatement I could ever say.